New Orleans has always been a city of contradictions, a place where the old and the new coexist in a delicate balance. It's a place of beauty and decay, of joy and sorrow, of wealth and poverty, all intertwined in a complex tapestry. It's also a city with a long history of violence and corruption, where the line between law and lawlessness often blurs. So it's no surprise that New Orleans became a hotbed for organized crime in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a time when the city was rapidly growing and changing. The city's port made it a hub for smuggling, with goods and contraband flowing in and out with ease. And its lax law enforcement, often riddled with corruption and bribery, made it easy for criminals to operate without fear of retribution. The Mafia, a secret criminal society with roots in Sicily, Italy, found a foothold in New Orleans among the city's large Italian immigrant population, who were seeking a better life, but often found themselves marginalized. These early mafiosi were known as Black Hand extortionists, using fear and intimidation to control their communities. They preyed on their fellow Italians, demanding protection money and threatening violence if they didn't pay up, creating an atmosphere of constant fear. If someone refused, they might find their shop vandalized, their family threatened, or worse, facing violent retaliation that could shatter lives. This reign of terror went on for years, casting a long shadow over the community and leaving a legacy of fear and mistrust that would last for generations. The Black Hand's grip on New Orleans tightened at the turn of the 20th century. They infiltrated labor unions, extorted businesses, and ran gambling rings. The police seemed powerless to stop them. One of the most notorious Black Hand incidents occurred in 1907. A young boy named Walter Lamana was kidnapped and held for ransom. His wealthy family paid the money, but the boy was tragically found murdered. The case shocked the city and brought unwanted attention to the Black Hand's activities. The Lamana case spurred some efforts to crack down on the Black Hand, but their grip on the city remained strong. They were becoming more organized, more powerful, and more dangerous. A new era was dawning in New Orleans, one ruled by fear and intimidation. In the early 1900s, two powerful mafia factions emerged in New Orleans, the Matranga family and the Provenzano family. These two families would become embroiled in a bitter and violent struggle for control over the city's lucrative waterfront and other criminal enterprises. The Matrangas, led by Charlie Matranga, were the older and more established group. They had deep roots in the community and a strong network of allies. They controlled the docks and much of the city's waterfront, which was a critical hub for trade and smuggling operations. The Provenzanos, led by the ruthless John Provenzano, were ambitious and eager to expand their territory. They sought to challenge the Matrangas' dominance and carve out their own piece of the criminal underworld. Tensions between the two families reached a boiling point in 1910, when New Orleans Police Chief David Hennessy was assassinated. His murder sent shockwaves through the city and intensified the rivalry. Hennessy had been investigating the Mafia and was close to making some major arrests. His efforts to dismantle the criminal networks made him a target. Though it was never proven, many believed the Mafia was behind Hennessy's murder. The assassination was seen as a direct message to law enforcement and a demonstration of the Mafia's reach. A grand jury was convened, and 9 Italians were indicted for the crime. The trial attracted widespread attention and was a pivotal moment in the city's history. However, the trial was a sham. Corruption and fear permeated the proceedings. Witnesses were intimidated, and the jury eventually acquitted all 9 defendants. The failure to secure convictions only emboldened the Mafia, leading to further violence and unrest in New Orleans. The acquittal of the Hennessy suspects sparked outrage in New Orleans, a city already simmering with tension and distrust. A furious mob stormed the jail where the defendants were being held and lynched 11 Italian immigrants, including several who had no connection to the Hennessy case. This act of violence shocked the nation and left a permanent scar on the city's history. The lynchings were a dark chapter in New Orleans history, and a testament to the power and influence of the Mafia, which had already begun to weave its web of corruption and fear throughout the city. In the aftermath of the lynchings, the Mafia adopted a lower profile, realizing that their overt actions had drawn too much unwanted attention. They convened in secret meetings, plotting new strategies to avoid the public eye and law enforcement scrutiny. They understood that their blatant disregard for the law had backfired spectacularly. To survive, they needed to find new ways to operate without attracting so much attention. This meant becoming more discreet and cunning in their operations. They bribed politicians and law enforcement officials, ensuring that they could continue their criminal activities with impunity. These alliances provided them with a shield against legal repercussions. They also diversified their operations, moving into legitimate businesses like restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. These establishments not only provided a steady stream of income, but also served as perfect fronts for their illicit activities. These businesses served as fronts for their illegal activities, such as gambling, loan sharking, and drug trafficking. By blending into the fabric of everyday life, the Mafia managed to maintain their grip on the city while avoiding the spotlight. Section 5. The Notorious Carlos Marcello. By the 1940s, the New Orleans Mafia was firmly under the control of Carlos Marcello. Marcello, a ruthless and cunning operator, was born in Tunisia but immigrated to the United States as a child. He quickly rose through the ranks of the New Orleans underworld, earning a reputation for his intelligence, ruthlessness, and connections to corrupt politicians. Marcello ran the New Orleans Mafia like a Fortune 500 company. He had interests in gambling, prostitution, drug trafficking, and labor racketeering. He also invested heavily in legitimate businesses, such as real estate and construction. Marcello was a master manipulator who used his power and influence to get what he wanted. He bribed politicians, judges, and police officers. He intimidated witnesses and jurors. He even had connections to the CIA. Section 6. The Kefauver Hearings. In the early 1950s, the U.S. Senate launched a series of high-profile hearings on organized crime. The hearings, chaired by Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee, were televised nationally and exposed the inner workings of the Mafia to the American public. Carlos Marcello was one of the most notorious mobsters called to testify before the Kefauver Committee. He denied any involvement in organized crime, but his testimony was unconvincing. The hearings helped to raise public awareness of the Mafia and led to increased law enforcement efforts to combat organized crime. However, Marcello remained a powerful and influential figure in New Orleans. He continued to run his criminal empire, and he evaded serious legal trouble for many years. Section 7. The FBI cracks down. In the 1960s, the FBI began to step up its efforts to dismantle the Mafia. Under the leadership of Director J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI launched a series of investigations and prosecutions that targeted Mafia leaders across the country. Carlos Marcello became a prime target of the FBI. In 1961, the FBI deported Marcello to Guatemala, claiming that he was an illegal immigrant. However, Marcello quickly returned to the United States and continued to run his criminal empire from New Orleans. In the 1980s, the FBI finally caught up with Marcello. He was convicted of racketeering and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Section 8. The End of an Era. New Orleans becomes an open city. Marcello's conviction marked the beginning of the end for the New Orleans Mafia. The organization was already weakened by internal strife and competition from other criminal groups. With Marcello out of the picture, the New Orleans Mafia went into rapid decline. By the early 2000s, the New Orleans Mafia was essentially defunct. The FBI declared New Orleans an open city, meaning that there was no longer a single dominant organized crime group in control. The demise of the New Orleans Mafia was the result of a number of factors, including increased law enforcement pressure, changing social norms, and the rise of new criminal organizations. Section 9. The Legacy of Violence. The New Orleans Mafia left a long and bloody legacy in its wake. Over the decades, the Mafia was responsible for countless murders, bombings, and other acts of violence. They terrorized citizens, corrupted politicians, and undermined the rule of law. The Mafia's impact on New Orleans is still felt today. The city has long struggled with crime and corruption, and the Mafia's legacy continues to cast a shadow over the city. However, New Orleans is a resilient city. It has survived hurricanes, floods, and epidemics. It will survive the legacy of the Mafia as well. Section 10. The Mafia in Popular Culture. The New Orleans Mafia has been a popular subject of books, movies, and television shows for decades. The city's unique atmosphere and the Mafia's colorful history have captured the imagination of writers and filmmakers alike. Some of the most famous examples of Mafia-themed entertainment set in New Orleans include the classic film The Big Easy from 1987 and the HBO series Treme, which aired from 2010 to 2013. These works of fiction often romanticize the Mafia, portraying mobsters as charming rogues or tragic figures. However, it's important to remember that the real-life Mafia was a brutal and ruthless criminal organization, responsible for immense suffering.